Welcome, everyone, back to the office. We're so glad to have you with us. We are going through this book called Lead Pastor, Biblical Thinking in the Church that Keeps Jesus in the Lead. And I would say, out of all the things that I've written, this is my heart, because we have to make every effort that we can to make sure that Jesus stays in the lead. Now, we're doing a section from the book now that's called Attitude. The attitudes that we have to keep as pastors and leaders and congregations in order to keep Christ center stage, owner, totally respected, and totally submitted to. I wrote this introduction. It has been said that the enemy of the church will be carried into the assembly on the back of human pride. Boy, I see that all the time. Knowing that God resists the proud, we must give all diligence to shepherd the attitudes with truth. The cross of Christ is not only our message, it's our method. I heard one theologian say, the cross is not only the message we preach, but it's the way we preach. And so it's very important that we keep a cross-like attitude and all of that. I love this statement. Jesus won lion-like victories in a lamb-like way when we have a Christ-like attitude, and that prevails in our churches. So anyway, we're protecting attitudes in this whole series. And the first attitude that we really want to protect is the fact that Jesus owns the church. Listen to Acts 20:28. Take heed, therefore, unto yourselves and to all the flock over the which the Holy Ghost has made you overseers, to feed the church of God, which he hath purchased with his own blood. Jesus paid a price for the church. It was his own blood, and he owns it. There's only one really in the church that should have preeminence, and that's Jesus. I find that there's always like a Diotrephes, which is in John's writings, who wants to take over and have the preeminence in the church. And we just can't have it. When that happens, then all of a sudden the power of God is stopped. You know, I've been in a lot of situations and in different places where there were people who thought they owned the church. And you know, some of them are hearty, good-hearted, longtime servants, and they're good people. But they've forgotten, and because they've forgotten that Christ owns the church, then they begin to take liberties in their authority and so forth, and then there becomes divisions in the church because they get the attitude that we own the church. We and our family have done this, and so therefore this church belongs to us. Sadly, our hearts have a tendency to love preeminence, and that sneaks in on us, doesn't it? Now, the opposite is true of a church that respects and guards Christ's ownership. I wrote this. When we take heed and are vigilant about these matters, Jesus then is free to advance his life and power and express his love amid joy throughout the congregation. This puts his life on display. And I would tell you that right now we're working with a church in a small town, helping to revitalize it. And with all my heart, as we work with them, it's my heart to see Christ build that church and rebuild that church so that the whole community looks and says, wow, look what Jesus has done. So, in taking this thing from a belief of a guarding attitude of the ownership of Christ to behavior, here are some suggestions. I would say, number one, we have to pray first. In other words, prayer has to be right up front in keeping the church that way. And then I think another thing would be for us to teach clearly the ownership of Christ, because it so quickly slips away. When we give ourselves, we give our offerings and our time and so forth, that can so easily slip away. And then we have to remind them again and again and again who owns the church. And then be a shepherd that serves, not a shepherd that loves preeminence yourself. And One thing I did in one church that I think can occasionally be done, maybe even a review once in a while, and that is to initiate a public ceremony where the church maybe kneels at the altar and gives the church back to Jesus. And so those kinds of things are just little subtle things that can keep the attitude right about who owns the church. And I would say this as pastors, I know this can creep in, but don't preach for your own glory. Preach for God's glory. And that'll all make a difference because Jesus said, I will build my church. And so, and then the great truth that he says, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. And so today, let's think about that. Who owns the church? Let's guard that. Okay? Thanks for joining us.